I spent my savings on his rehab. The day he got clean, he dumped me for his sober coach. I didn't cry when he said it. I didn't scream either. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening to the words land one by one like objects dropping into an empty room. 4 years together, reduced to a quiet speech about growth and clarity and how he needed people who truly understood his journey now. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A bank notification. I didn't open it yet. I already knew what it would say. When I finally looked, the number felt unreal. $847. That was it. That was what was left of a life I had built carefully, patiently, believing love meant staying steady while someone else fell apart and found their way back. 4 years earlier, I'd had $68,000 saved. I remembered that number clearly because I'd been proud of it. It had felt like proof I was doing something right. I asked him one question. When were you going to tell me? He sighed, like I was asking for too much. I'm telling you now. I nodded because nodding was easier than admitting my chest felt hollow. He talked about self-reflection, about sobriety, about becoming who he was meant to be, about how I hadn't changed and how that meant I was holding him back. I thought about the nights I'd waited up, listening for his keys, the mornings I'd cleaned up messes he didn't remember making, the rent checks I'd covered without comment, the promises I'd believed because I needed them to be true. I thought about the day I found him on the bathroom floor and genuinely believed he was dead. When he finally stopped talking, the silence pressed in. I stood up, walked to the counter, and slid an envelope across to him. He frowned, confused, then opened it. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You can't be serious," he said. "That's insane." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Read it again." His smile faded, not into guilt, just irritation. That was the moment I understood something painful and permanent. The person who walked out of rehab wasn't the person I'd spent 4 years loving. And the woman sitting in that room, me, was done setting herself on fire to keep someone else warm. I picked up my phone, looked at that number again, and realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the reckoning. We met when I was 28 and he was 26, at a time when both of us still believed love was mostly about timing. A mutual friend dragged us to a small dinner party. Too many people in a too small apartment, cheap wine and mismatched glasses, everyone pretending they weren't checking their phones. He had this easy smile, the kind that made you feel noticed without trying too hard. When he laughed, people leaned in. When he talked, they listened. At first, everything felt normal, comfortably normal. We did the things couples do when nothing is broken yet. Weeknight dinners, movies we barely paid attention to, weekend trips that felt like little escapes from real life. He was affectionate, attentive, the kind of man who remembered small details about me. I told myself I was lucky. I believed it. 6 months in, I noticed he drank more than usual. Not alarming at first, just frequent. A couple of drinks after work, a little too eager to refill his glass. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off. "I've just been stressed," he said. "It's temporary." A year in, the pills showed up. Prescriptions at first, then excuses, then secrecy. He'd swear he had it under control, that he knew his limits. I wanted to believe him. Loving someone means believing them, right? By year 2, it wasn't just alcohol or pills. It was whatever he could get his hands on. His moods became unpredictable. Some days he was charming and apologetic, promising me he'd get help. Other days, he was defensive, angry, insisting I was overreacting. I learned to read his face the moment I walked through the door, to brace myself before speaking. I won't pretend I stayed purely out of love. Part of me thought I could fix him. Part of me was already too invested to leave without admitting I'd made a mistake. But I did love him. That part was real. The real spiral started about a year and a half before everything fell apart. He lost his job, marketing coordinator at a startup, then the next one, and the one after that. Each time, it was someone else's fault. The boss didn't understand him. The environment was toxic. Nobody appreciated his potential. It was never about showing up late smelling like alcohol. Never about disappearing for hours in the middle of the day. By then, I was covering rent. His half. My half. All of it. He moved into my place temporarily, which turned permanent without a conversation. I made decent money and had worked hard to build stability for myself. Watching thousands of dollars disappear every month while he contributed nothing wore me down in ways I didn't know how to articulate. Still, I stayed. Because every time I reached my limit, he'd cry. He'd tell me he needed me, that he couldn't do this without me, that he'd get help if I just didn't give up on him yet. And every time I believed him. The breaking point came the night I came home and found him passed out on the bathroom floor, not sleeping. Passed out. There was vomit, blood from where he'd hit his head on the sink. For about 30 seconds, I was certain he was dead. My hands shook as I checked his pulse. I remember thinking, this is how it ends. That night, I gave him an ultimatum. Rehab, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Or I'm done. No more chances. He looked me in the eye and agreed, said he was ready, said he wanted his life back, said he wanted us back. And I believed him, one last time. He went into rehab on February 1st. I remember the date because I told myself it was the beginning of something better. I dropped him off with a bag I'd packed carefully, comfortable clothes, family photos, a handwritten note I'd slipped into one of the pockets telling him I was proud of him. He hugged me tighter than usual before he went inside. I'm really going to do this, he said. I promise. For the first month, contact was limited. One supervised call a week. Short, structured conversations where he sounded cautious but hopeful, like someone learning how to speak again. He told me about group sessions, about finally sleeping through the night, about realizing how much damage he'd done. I listened closely, holding on to every word like proof that my sacrifice was worth it. Every Sunday, I drove 3 hours each way to visit during approved hours. I sat across from him in sterile rooms with beige walls and motivational posters, smiling like everything was fine. He looked clearer, healthier. It felt like the person I'd fallen for was slowly resurfacing. Month 2, he sounded even better, more confident, more grounded. He told me he loved me, said he couldn't wait to start fresh with me, promised he was going to make everything up to me. I replayed those conversations later, alone in my car, clinging to them when doubt crept in. The facility wasn't cheap. I'd chosen one of the better ones, the kind with real success rates, not revolving doors. 90 days, $32,000. My insurance wouldn't cover a cent because we weren't married. His had lapsed months earlier. I paid it anyway, draining most of what I had left. I told myself it was an investment in our future. The first time he mentioned his sober coach, it barely registered. He's assigned to help with aftercare, he said casually during one of our calls. Accountability check-ins, transition stuff. I didn't think much of it. Why would I? Recovery involves support systems, structure, guidance. I was relieved someone would be helping him stay on track. He mentioned him again a week later. Then again. He really gets it, he said once. He's been where I am. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Just slightly, but I ignored it. I didn't want to be the suspicious girlfriend. I didn't want to project fear where there was supposed to be healing. By the 8th week, the tone of our conversations shifted, subtly. He still said the right things, but there was a distance I couldn't quite place. He asked fewer questions about my life, seemed distracted. Sometimes I could hear typing in the background during our calls. Are you busy? I asked once. No, he said too quickly. Just taking notes. I told myself I was imagining things, that recovery changes people, that I needed to give him space to grow. Looking back, that's when the balance tipped. I was still driving hours every weekend, still budgeting tightly, still eating cheap meals to stretch what little I had left. Meanwhile, he was forming connections I wasn't part of, building a version of himself that no longer included me in the center of it. I didn't know then that they'd already been texting, that while I was planning how to support him once he came home, he was planning something else entirely. All I knew was that something felt off, and I ignored it. Because admitting the truth would have meant facing the possibility that I wasn't part of his recovery story anymore, that I was just a chapter he was getting ready to close. He completed the program on March 30th. I picked him up that afternoon with flowers in my hands and a tight knot in my chest I told myself was just nerves. He smiled when he saw me, hugged me briefly, too briefly, but I brushed it off. Recovery changes people. I kept reminding myself of that like it was a shield. I took him to his favorite restaurant, the one he'd been talking about craving for weeks. He barely touched his food, kept checking his phone, turning it face down when I noticed. His smile felt practiced, like something he'd rehearsed in advance. We got back to the apartment around 8. I'd cleaned everything, bought new sheets, stocked the fridge with sparkling cider because obviously no alcohol. I thought we'd talk about next steps, about therapy, about rebuilding, about us. Instead, he sat down across from me and said, "We need to talk." You know how sometimes your body reacts before your mind catches up? My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I nodded anyway. "I've been doing a lot of self-reflection in there," he started, "and I've realized we're just in different places now." I didn't interrupt. I just watched his mouth move, listened to words that sounded polished, rehearsed. "I'm sober now. I'm growing. I'm becoming who I'm meant to be." He paused. "And you're still the same." The room felt smaller. "I need to surround myself with people who understand my journey," he continued. "People on the same wavelength." I stared at him. "You mean people who've struggled with addiction?" "You wouldn't really get it," he said gently, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "You've never been through this." I heard myself say, "I paid $32,000 for you to get clean." My voice sounded distant, like it wasn't mine. He looked annoyed. Not guilty, not ashamed, annoyed. "I appreciate that," he said. "But this is about my growth. I can't be held back by guilt or obligation. My therapist says that's toxic." I met his eyes. "Your therapist?" I said slowly. "Or your sober coach?" His face answered before his mouth did. "He understands me," he said quietly. "We connected on a deeper level." The air left my lungs. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. "We've been texting for a few weeks." "Texting," I repeated. "And that's all?" "Nothing physical," he said quickly. "But I'm moving in with him. He has a place about 40 minutes away." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there trying to process how efficiently my life was being dismantled. He stood up, went to the bedroom, and started gathering his things, what little he'd had with him. Later, I realized he'd already packed most of it during the 1 hour I'd left him alone earlier to pick up dinner. I asked him one last question. "When were you planning to tell me?" "I'm telling you now," he said without irony. When he came back into the living room, bags in hand, I walked to the counter and picked up an envelope I prepared earlier that day, something I hadn't even been sure I'd use. I handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked, frowning as he opened it. He read the first page, then laughed. Really laughed. "You can't be serious," he said. "You can't invoice someone for being in a relationship." "Read the fine print," I said evenly. I explained. The financial responsibility agreement he'd signed when he moved in. The unpaid rent for 18 months. The rehab money. Discussed as a loan, agreed upon verbally, with witnesses. My sister had been there. I'd spent the last 3 hours he'd been packing with a paralegal friend, making sure everything was documented. His laughter died. "This won't hold up," he snapped. "Maybe not all of it," I said, "but some of it will. And even if it doesn't, I'm filing." He called me manipulative, called me names, dropped the envelope on the counter, and walked out. That was April 1st, April Fool's Day. And somehow that felt painfully appropriate. The apartment didn't feel empty after he left. It felt exposed. Like something essential had been ripped out, and the rest of the space hadn't caught up yet. His mug was still in the sink. One of his shoes sat crooked by the door. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, waiting for the adrenaline to wear off so I could finally fall apart. It didn't happen. Instead, I opened my phone and checked my bank account again. $847. The number stared back at me, unblinking. I sat down on the couch slowly, hands resting on my knees, and let the reality sink in. 4 years, $68,000, gone. Not slowly, not abstractly, but in a series of decisions I'd made while telling myself I was being supportive. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the conversation, every word he'd said looping in my head. "I'm growing. You're still the same." The audacity of it settled in like a bruise. I thought about the nights I'd held him while he shook, the mornings I'd made excuses for him, the way I'd rearranged my entire life to keep him afloat. And he'd walked out like I was an inconvenience. The next morning, I found the envelope still sitting on the counter where he'd left it, unopened, unclaimed. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, if I was being cruel, vindictive. That's the word people like to use when a woman finally stops absorbing damage quietly. I called my sister. She listened without interrupting while I talked myself in circles, about guilt, about fear, about whether I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said when I finally stopped. "You set a boundary. That's not cruelty." It didn't erase the knot in my chest, but it helped. A week passed with no word from him. No apology, no explanation, just silence. I told myself that meant he was moving on, that I should do the same. Then my phone started blowing up. Not from him, from his mother. The first message was long. The second was longer. By the end of 2 hours, there were 53 texts waiting for me. I counted them, mostly because I couldn't believe the volume. Accusations spilled across my screen. How dare I try to profit from her son's recovery? How dare I put a price on love? How dare I threaten his sobriety? I responded once. I paid for him to get clean. He left me the day he got out for another man. I'm recouping my losses. Her reply was an 8-minute voice memo. She screamed the entire time. About how I was ruining his fresh start. About how I was a narcissist, a financial abuser, a predator who had taken advantage of her son's vulnerable state. I blocked her. I should have done it sooner. That's when he started texting. Not apologies, threats. You're going to drop this, one message read, or you'll regret it. Another. My coach knows lawyers. This is harassment. I can get a restraining order. I didn't reply. My lawyer had warned me not to engage. So I didn't. Every message went into a folder. Every voicemail got saved. Every threat documented. On April 15th, I got a call from my biggest client. They'd been working with me for years and suddenly wanted to check in. Apparently, someone had called them and suggested I was financially unstable and going through a mental health crisis. I didn't have to ask who. The client was calm about it, listened while I explained, then said, "Sounds like you dodged a bullet." I hung up and sat there, shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about survival. And for the first time since he walked out, I stopped reacting and started preparing. 3 weeks after he walked out, things stopped feeling chaotic and started feeling calculated. I went through with filing the claim. I gathered everything: the invoice, the receipts I'd kept without realizing how much they'd matter, the bank statements showing 18 months of rent payments, the text messages where he promised to pay me back once he got on his feet. I brought it all to a lawyer. The consultation cost me $400, money I really didn't have, but I needed someone objective to tell me whether I was crazy for doing this. He wasn't shocked. "You've got a decent case," he said, flipping through the documents. "Not perfect, but solid enough to pursue." He explained the odds. I could probably recoup the rent money, maybe 30 to 40% of the rehab costs, if we could prove it had been discussed as a loan. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but it wasn't a long shot either. The demand letter went out April 10th. Certified mail. Signature required. 2 days later, my phone exploded. Not from him. From his mother. Again. Different number this time. I counted out of disbelief. 53 texts in 2 hours. Accusations stacked on top of each other, faster than I could read them. How dare I try to profit from her son's recovery? How dare I put a price on love? How dare I kick him while he was trying to build a new life? I replied once. I paid for him to get clean. He left me the day he got out. I'm recouping my losses. She sent another voice memo. 8 minutes. Screaming. Calling me a horrible person. Saying her son deserved better. Saying I was trying to ruin his sobriety. The irony didn't escape me. That defending the man who abandoned me after I drained my savings somehow made me the villain. I blocked her again. Then he started texting. The tone was different now. Sharper. Threatening. You're going to drop this or you'll regret it. My coach knows lawyers. This is harassment. I can get a restraining order. I didn't respond. My lawyer had been clear. Don't engage. So I didn't. I documented everything instead. Screenshots, timestamps, call logs, a growing folder of proof that I was doing this by the book, and he wasn't. April 15th, tax day. Another date the universe seemed to enjoy mocking me with. My biggest client called. A commercial property management company I'd worked with for over 3 years. They said they had some concerns and wanted to talk. Apparently, someone had contacted them claiming I was financially unstable and going through a mental health crisis and that they might want to reconsider using my services. He didn't have their number before, which meant he'd gone through my office files. During one of the times he'd stopped by to grab something he forgot. I explained the situation calmly, gave them the short version. They listened. Then the client said, "Sounds like you dodged a bullet." They didn't drop me. But the attempt to mess with my livelihood crossed a line I hadn't known existed until it was stepped over. I sent everything to my lawyer. He added it to the file. April 18th, a mutual friend sent me screenshots I hadn't asked for. Social media posts, smiling photos. Him and the sober coach at a recovery event, arms around each other, captions about beautiful new beginnings, and finding real love in recovery. I looked. I won't pretend I didn't. It stung. Not because I wanted him back, but because of what I'd given up to get him there. What caught my attention wasn't their smiles. It was the details. New clothes, a designer bag on the table at a restaurant I couldn't afford anymore. Meanwhile, I was eating ramen and eggs, trying to rebuild from zero. April 22nd, his mother texted again. New number. "You need to stop this legal nonsense," she wrote. "He doesn't have the money. You're going to make him relapse." That one actually made me laugh, out loud. I blocked the number. April 25th. I received notice that he was disputing the claim. He'd hired a lawyer. His argument? The rehab payment was a gift, given freely in the context of a romantic relationship, no obligation to repay. My lawyer wasn't surprised. We prepared our response. That's when my paralegal friend mentioned something interesting. He'd done some digging, public records, nothing shady, and found out the sober coach had been fired from 2 previous facilities for boundary violations with clients. Nothing criminal, but enough of a pattern that legit places wouldn't touch him anymore. Now he was running his own private coaching practice. No certifications, no licenses, just a website and a convincing story. I didn't use the information yet, I just kept it. May 1st, exactly 1 month after he left, I got served with papers. He was filing for a restraining order. The claim? Financial harassment and stalking. His evidence? The demand letter. The lawsuit. That was it. No actual stalking, no direct contact, just legal action. My lawyer called it what it was, an intimidation tactic. The hearing was May 8th. The judge dismissed it in minutes. Said legal proceedings didn't constitute harassment. He was there with the sober coach, who actually stood up and tried to argue with the judge. The judge shut him down and threatened contempt. I won't lie, watching that felt better than it should have. After the hearing, he tried to approach me. The coach grabbed his arm, whispered something, and pulled him back. For a second, our eyes met. His expression was a mix of anger and something else. Regret, maybe. I didn't stop walking. By then, it was clear. This wasn't just a breakup anymore. This was a full-scale unraveling. And it was only gaining momentum. The silence that followed felt heavier than the chaos. After the restraining order was dismissed, everything went quiet for a few days. No texts from burner numbers, no messages from his mother, no social media screenshots from mutual friends. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of a room after a storm, knowing something else was coming. I barely slept. Every night, I lay awake replaying the last 4 years, trying to pinpoint the exact moment I crossed the line from partner to provider, from girlfriend to safety net. My body felt permanently tense, like I was bracing for impact that never quite arrived. My hands shook when my phone buzzed. My chest tightened every time an unknown number popped up. Then the call came. May 20th. My insurance company. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The representative sounded polite, almost apologetic, as she explained that a claim had been filed against my policy. Property damage, breaking and entering, destruction of personal belongings. Not my apartment, his new one. I felt cold all over. They said I'd broken in and destroyed things while he wasn't home, that I'd caused significant damage. I didn't even argue. I just told them where I'd been that day. A job site 2 hours away, from 9 in the morning until 6 at night. 3 witnesses, a client, documentation. The investigation didn't take long. Within 2 days, the claim was flagged as fraudulent. Apparently, once pressed for evidence, he changed his story. First, he got the date wrong. Then it wasn't physical damage, it was emotional distress. The whole thing collapsed under even minimal scrutiny. The investigator told me it was one of the most blatant false claims he'd ever seen and asked if I wanted to pursue charges. I told him I needed time to think. I added it to the pile. That night I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, and felt something inside me finally give way. Not anger, not sadness. Exhaustion. Bone-deep exhaustion from carrying responsibility that had never been mine to begin with. A few days later, the sober coach reached out directly. I didn't even know how he got my number. "Hey," the message read, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Let's talk this out like adults. He's really stressed about the lawsuit, and it's affecting his recovery. You seem like a good person. I'm sure we can work something out." I showed it to my lawyer. He laughed, not kindly. "They're getting desperate," he said. "Don't respond." So I didn't. June 3rd, I got served again. Another lawsuit. This time, he was suing me for emotional distress and defamation of character. The claim was that by filing my lawsuit, I was publicly damaging his reputation in the recovery community and threatening his sobriety. The amount he was seeking, $75,000. My lawyer didn't sugarcoat it. "This is a slap suit," he said. "It's meant to scare you, drain you, make you drop your claim." For the first time since this started, I felt fear creep in. Not sharp panic, something worse. A slow, sinking dread. What if he dragged this out for years? What if I lost everything just trying to stand up for myself? We filed a motion to dismiss, and a countersuit for legal fees and frivolous litigation. While the paperwork moved forward, I heard things through mutual friends. His new life wasn't as stable as it looked online. The coach's private practice was barely hanging on. A handful of clients, no real income. The fantasy was cracking. Meanwhile, I was scraping by, eating cheap food, turning down social plans, watching my savings rebuild dollar by dollar, painfully slow. Some nights I wondered if it was worth it, if letting it go would be easier. But then I'd remember the bathroom floor, the blood, the promises, the way he'd walked out without looking back. And I knew I couldn't undo this now, even if I wanted to, because the darkest realization wasn't what he'd done to me. It was how close I'd come to disappearing myself just to keep him standing. June 10th was the first day I felt the balance shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that I could breathe again. My lawyer called me that morning and asked if I was sitting down. As part of the discovery process tied to my lawsuit, we'd run a credit check on him. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just standard procedure. His credit score had collapsed. In the span of a month, he'd opened 3 new credit cards, all near their limits already. One of them had missed its first payment. Another was dangerously close. The lawsuit I'd filed was now officially on record with the court, which meant it was showing up on his credit report as an active legal claim. Even if I never saw a dollar, it was there, dragging his score down, following him. I didn't feel joy, not exactly, but I felt something loosen in my chest. A few days later, a mutual friend told me something else. He hadn't told me directly, of course. He didn't say anything directly anymore, but the story traveled the way these things always do, quietly, sideways. Things weren't going well between him and the sober coach. Money was tight. The coach's private practice wasn't thriving like he'd claimed. 4 clients, maybe 5 on a good week, all out of his apartment. No certifications, no licenses, just confidence and carefully chosen words. Apparently, my ex had believed he was more established than he really was. He was job hunting now, interviews that went nowhere. Between his spotty work history and the lawsuit appearing on background checks, employers were losing interest fast. When he tried to explain, saying he was the victim of wrongful legal action, conversations ended abruptly. June 15th, his credit cards started getting declined. The mutual friend saw it happen at a coffee shop. He tried to pay, declined, tried another, declined again. He laughed it off, but the friend said his hands were shaking. His credit score had dropped into the low 500s. Everything he'd tried to build on top of my sacrifice was collapsing under its own weight. Then came the call that changed everything. June 20th. My lawyer sounded almost satisfied when he spoke. "Remember that information about the coach?" he asked. I did. Turns out there was more. A third incident. A former client had filed a complaint with the state licensing board. The sober coach had never actually been licensed. He'd been working under someone else's supervision and had been fired before earning his credentials. Everything he was doing now, coaching, counseling, recovery guidance, was technically illegal. My lawyer asked a simple question. "Do you want me to forward this to the board?" "Yes," I said immediately. One anonymous tip was all it took. Within days, the coach was under investigation. June 25th, he called me. This time there was no friendliness, no pretending to be reasonable. "You need to back off," he said. Back off, he said. "This is getting out of hand. He's not doing well, and you're making it worse." "He left me the day he got out of rehab that I paid for," I replied calmly. "I'm just trying to get my money back." "You're being vindictive." "If I wanted to punish him," I said, "I'd be doing a lot more than filing a civil suit. I want my $60,000 back. That's it." "He doesn't have it." "Then he shouldn't have accepted it." He hung up. A week later, the slap suit was dismissed. The judge didn't hesitate. He called the claims baseless and awarded me $8,500 in legal fees. He had 30 days to pay. He didn't. By early July, everything unraveled at once. The investigation forced the coach to cease all activities. His income dropped to 0. The fighting between them escalated, and then, inevitably, he walked away. The man who'd talked about beautiful new beginnings dumped him the moment things got hard. July 12th, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Please drop the lawsuit. I'm sorry. I'll pay you back. I just need time. I forwarded it to my lawyer. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started deciding. Once the decision was made, everything moved faster than I expected. My lawyer drafted a formal settlement offer and sent it to him the same day I forwarded the message. The terms were simple, almost generous, considering everything that had happened. $50,000 paid over 5 years, 6% interest, monthly payments of $900. The first payment, $5,000, due within 30 days. Missed 2 consecutive payments, and the full balance would become due immediately. Or we would proceed to trial and pursue the full amount, plus legal fees. He asked for a week to think about it. During that week, the rest of his life unraveled. A mutual friend filled me in, carefully, like someone delivering bad news they weren't sure I wanted. The sober coach had kicked him out, told him he was too much drama, that the legal mess was putting his career, what was left of it, at risk. The same man who'd talked about growth and clarity and soul-level connections had walked away the moment things got inconvenient. He moved back in with his mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who'd sent me 8-minute voice memos screaming about what a monster I was. The same woman who said I was trying to ruin her son's fresh start. Now they were under the same roof again, fighting about money, about the settlement, about who was to blame. On July 20th, his lawyer emailed mine. He accepted the settlement. The paperwork arrived the next day. I read it slowly, twice. My name printed cleanly at the top, the numbers laid out in unemotional legal language. $50,000, 5 years, interest, consequences. I signed. So did he. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Mostly I felt tired. But there was relief in knowing the chaos had a shape now, boundaries drawn in ink instead of fear. 4 months later, I gave myself permission to stop bracing. The first payment was due August 18th. It arrived late, August 23rd, with no explanation. I documented it and let it go. September's payment was on time. October's was 3 days late. November's arrived on schedule again. Barely consistent, but consistent enough. My lawyer set it up so the payments went into a separate account automatically. I didn't have to see his name every month unless something went wrong. As for me, life didn't magically fix itself, but it stabilized. I picked up 2 new commercial contracts in August. Business stayed steady. My savings account started inching upward again. Not impressive, not where I'd been before, but by winter, I was sitting at about $9,000. It was something. I didn't date, not because I missed him, but because the idea of trusting someone again felt exhausting. My sister kept trying to set me up, and I kept deflecting with jokes. Maybe someday. Just not yet. Through mutual friends, I heard how things were going for him. He'd taken a job at a call center. Not glamorous, but income. His mother kicked him out in September after a massive blowout over the settlement payments. Now he was renting a room in someone's house, starting over again in his 30s with nothing but debt and resentment. The sober coach had moved to another state. The licensing board revoked his ability to practice. No one knew what he was doing now, or if he'd finally stopped pretending to be something he wasn't. I ran into my ex once. October. A grocery store. Total accident. We made eye contact from opposite ends of the aisle. He looked away first. I didn't stop. Neither did he. No words, no confrontation, just 2 people passing through the same space with entirely different futures ahead of them. I expected to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, closure. Instead, I felt tired. The fallout wasn't explosive in the end. It was quiet, ordinary, a series of consequences unfolding slowly, relentlessly, without drama or apology. And somehow that felt fitting. The hardest part of all this wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal or the lawsuits or watching someone I loved turn into a stranger who saw me as an obstacle instead of a partner. It was realizing how much of myself I'd erased, trying to save someone who never planned on saving himself. I started therapy in June. At first, it felt like admitting failure, like confirming that I hadn't been strong enough to handle my own life. My therapist reframed it gently. "You weren't weak," she said. "You were loyal, without boundaries." That landed harder than anything else. Some days, I still think about the 4 years I poured into that relationship, the plans I delayed, the risks I didn't take, The way I convinced myself that love meant endurance instead of mutual care. On my worst days, it feels like wasted time, but I'm learning to see it differently. It wasn't wasted. It taught me exactly where my limits are and what happens when I ignore them. Do I regret filing the lawsuit? No. I needed to do something. I needed to draw a line that said my time, my money, and my dignity mattered. Even if I never see every dollar of that settlement, I didn't roll over. I didn't disappear quietly to make things easier for someone else. Do I think he learned anything? Probably not. People like him don't connect actions to consequences. In his version of this story, I'm the villain. I've made peace with that. I don't need to be the hero in someone else's narrative to know I did the right thing. I heard from my sister recently. She told me she was proud of me. No one had said that through any of this. Not while I was being told to let it go. Not while I was being accused of being vindictive. Hearing someone say they were proud of me for standing up for myself hit in a way I wasn't prepared for. I don't hate my ex. I don't love him either. I loved who I thought he was. I loved who he could have been. But the person he chose to be, that's not someone I miss. I hope he stays sober. I genuinely do. Addiction is hell, and no one deserves that. But I also hope that every time he makes that monthly payment, he remembers that actions have consequences, and that love isn't something you fund with someone else's life. As for me, I'm rebuilding, slowly, quietly, with intention. I'm done being the woman who sets herself on fire to keep someone else warm. That version of me is gone. And honestly, good riddance.